There is an evac team on its way to this location. Once I take the chopper, I will begin global infection. Game over? This game is just beginning.
The Thing game from 2002 is a fun little action horror romp. It captures the spirit of the film, although some of the execution is spotty. The developers had high ambitions of building a trust and infection system that did the film justice. That said, due to execution and technical limitations, they're not able to stick the landing. As well, there are stretches that can drive you up the wall and make you want to toss your J&B scotch at your computer.
Cheating bitch.
Overall, it is an enjoyable experience that any fan of the film should check out, rough edges and all.
It's just a scratch.
Hey, this area looks alright.
A note before beginning, I'll be making mentions of the film several times throughout, so full spoilers on the film if you haven't seen it. I'm playing the PC version with an HD mod. You can find the game on my Abandonware. Check the description and pin comment for a link to the mod. The game starts off with some Norwegians meeting their end from a thing. We get a long look at it. I'm a bit conflicted by this intro. Instead of building up to reveal, we get to see it in all its glory. That said, there's a good chance those playing the game have seen the film, so it's not like it's anything new to us. The game takes place sometime after the movie. I've seen 3 months written on wikis, so let's go with that. We play as Captain Blake, one with a strong resemblance to composer Tommy Tallarico. Wonder if his mother is proud of his line of work. We come to US Outpost 31, where the film takes place to see what happened. There are some nice throwbacks to the movie we could find in the first stage. The remains of the UFO that the infected Blair, Wilford Brimley's character, was building.
What the hell?
What do you think it is, Captain?
I don't know and I don't care.
Looks like a goddamn UFO to me. This shit gives me the creeps.
Yeah, we're not alone in the universe and all that crap. Check it out and move on.
A tape recording from MacReady, Kurt Russell's character.
I'm gonna hide this tape when I'm finished. If none of us make it, at least there'll be some kind of a record. The storm's been hitting us pretty hard now for 48 hours. We still have nothing to go on. One other thing. I think it rips through your clothes when it takes you over. Windows found some shredded long johns, but the name tag was missing. They could be anybody's. We're all very tired. There's nothing else I can do. Just wait. R.J. MacReady, helicopter pilot, U.S. Outpost North 31.
Seeing Childs, Keith David's character frozen to death, but no sign of MacReady.
What have you got?
One body. Identification says Childs, no survivors. And what appears to be a...
One body and what?
and some kind of unidentified craft. It looks... well, like a UFO.
This puts the theory of whether Childs fell victim to infection to rest. That was such a great element of the ending of the film. The ambiguity of Childs or MacReady being infected. How Childs runs off for some time before reuniting with MacReady. John Carpenter, director of the film, considers the game canon, so there you go. I have to note this time frame of films with John Carpenter. While they had mixed commercial success, his 80s run of films became cult classics with longevity. And on the note of longevity, Kurt Russell and Keith David are still prolific to this day. Kurt Russell already had a prolific career as a child star before the film. He still pops up in various films to this day. This was Keith David's second film. While he still appears in many works on screen, he's had quite the voice acting career. Some very notable roles in the gaming space.
Tartarus, the prophets have betrayed us.
Knowing the truth about Sovereign is brutal. It's nightmare stuff. I can't blame others for not wanting to believe it, but I know how important it is. So I keep trying.
The late Wilford Brimley continued to appear in many notable works after the film. Although if you're below a certain age, you likely know him best as the diabetes guy.
If you have type 2 diabetes like I have, you're confronted with choices. You can choose to feel sorry for yourself. I hope you don't. I hope you choose to get involved with a good doctor. Find out some things about diabetes and your own body in the bargain.
As the game begins, we get lots of text pop-ups. Many text pop-ups. This is 2002 after all, still a few years before the hand-holding era began. It's nice they've been more integrated into games beyond a bunch of text boxes, although not the hand-holding. Makes the game seem more complex than it really is once you get a feel for it. This being Antarctica, there are stretches where we need to brave the cold. We need to keep an eye on our depleting meter to not freeze to death. We have guiding poles to lead the way, which makes sense from a gameplay and location perspective. Not much to say about these sections. Keep an eye on your meter and step inside to replenish it. Games with cold systems tend to have this approach. Some games have gotten more creative, like cryostasis, but for the most part it has the same fundamental idea. Don't stay out in the cold too long. I do have to question some characters' choices of not keeping their heads bundled up in the cold. And again, some characters did the same thing in the movie. Throughout the thing, we'll assemble squads with those we come across. Soldiers, engineers, and medics.
Blake, you need anything repaired or even a simple bypass, and I'm your man.
If any of you take on any damage, get back to me ASAP, and I'll help you out. I'm not carrying any dead bodies back.
I'm locked, loaded, and ready to make shit dead.
Soldiers have the highest accuracy with a weapon. Engineers can fix junction boxes that we can't.
I need an engineer.
Yes, sir.
Medics can heal us and our comrades, although they can't heal themselves. We have to do that with the medkits we find.
This should help. It's just a scratch.
We could give commands, but how they act around us can vary. We may need to earn their trust. Gain trust by giving them weapons and helping them out, healing them. Lose trust in hitting them by accident, or take away their gun. And if they get spooked, like seeing dead bodies or too much combat, they're going to be on edge. They might vomit. They start vibrating with motion like a tweaker. They might start shooting at nothing and might even take their own lives. I love the little blurbs they give when fear kicks in or they see something unsettling.
They're everywhere, man! He's double dead.
As far as their AI goes, it works fine for the most part. You could give them weapons and have confidence they'll actually do a good job of killing enemies. Sometimes they'll get stuck on something, but you could shove them around to get them out of their way. That said, you have to be careful of what weapons you give, as they're easy to lose in a literal sense. There are points where level transitions result in our squad disappearing. Not all the time, but more often than not. I learned early on to ensure I always had a flamethrower blowtorch on hand. I wasn't too thrilled when my squad mate with the flamethrower vanished and there was no way to get it back. If you do have a squad in tow for the next level, you have to re-enable them to follow. There were several times during the start of a level I'd walk off and then realize they weren't following. Speaking of level transitions, they could be a bit odd. Some continue right where we left off, others can have stretches of time and distance pass. Thing is, the way it's done, it feels like my game glitched and I missed cutscenes establishing how I got there. There were discussions early on to have the game be open world as opposed to linear. Interesting to think about how different the game could have been if it turned out that way. Remember, this was 2002 and the open world was still in its infancy. The trust system is interesting an idea. The execution isn't quite there on several fronts. Something the developers mentioned that they weren't able to get right due to technical and design constraints. It never nails that feeling that the film has, the loss of trust amongst those at the outpost. Which leads to the other key system, the infection system. What we all know and love about the IP. Are those we travel with infected? Are we infected? Well, Blake himself never becomes infected. But with the others, it is possible.
We got company!
And once again, it's a case of an interesting idea, but the execution is off, and by far the game's biggest flaw. Throughout our journeys, we'll find these blood test kits. Quite different in how they work compared to the ones in the film.
Alright, let's do this.
It is possible that a squad mate can turn to a thing at random. But the major issue? There are several scripted moments throughout our playthrough where an NPC will turn into a thing. There's nothing we could do about this. This led to some comical moments. I would do a blood test on a squad member. They'd be fine. Then I'd walk a few feet forward and hit the script trigger where they would turn.
Alright, let's do it! company.
Again, this is something the developers shared as a frustration. It was their main focus of tackling the game's sequel that never came due to the studio shutting down, unfortunately. There are a couple of tense moments that blend the trust and infection system together. One is the introduction with the first tests.
Now I'm gonna show you what I already know.
Maybe you will get us out of this. We got company. Burn it. Kill it. Jesus.
The other comes later in the game where we come across two individuals at each other's throats.
Are you crazy? Those things are everywhere.
Then why don't you go find him?
No, I think I'm gonna stay right here.
Back down, Stoles. You don't want this fight.
Screw you! I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, but it ends now!
Yeah, and it ends with you.
These two sections show a glimpse of what the system could have been. Imagine if you had a bickering squad with limited blood tests. What would you do? They could have gone the morality route that became popular in games around this time frame. And if someone does turn into a thing, they're not too hard to defeat. Give them a few torches and some lead. Combat is pretty straightforward. While we play in the third-person perspective, you could switch to first-person for better aim, although you can't move around. The game is pretty generous in regards to auto-aim, especially on consoles. You could still do that for the PC version, although I enabled mouse look. Combat isn't the game's strong suit, but it's fine as is, not what they were focusing on. I did like at various points where the game would cut to fix camera angles. Some used to build atmosphere or throw a gotcha our way. We have a mixture of creatures to deal with. Lots of small head crabs. Bullets are enough to take them down. It's the larger things that take more work. You need a combination of bullets and fire. You have to be careful that you don't light up your teammates or yourself. The blowtorch I found to be very inconsistent. You have to get up close and personal, and even then can be iffy. Speaking of iffy, I can't recall the last time I played a game where I felt less in control of where a grenade toss would end up. Before we move through the major story beats, it's unfortunate I could never get a squad member to do the river dance glitch like Spoonie did in his video. On the note of Spoonie, here's the obligatory mention that I hope he one day makes another video. Now is the time for the year of the Spoonie, as it's been for several years now. I know, it's a long-running joke. It was either his video on The Thing or Final Fantasy VIII that was my first video I watched of his. I haven't played The Thing before this. While I've since come across other reviews of this game, for a long time his impressions of the game were what I associated it with. As of writing, he is doing streams with the guy who played Curtis in Phantasmagoria 2, so who knows? Perhaps 2024 will be the year of the Spoonie, this time for real. Anyways, let's now go through some of the highs and lows of the game and the story, so spoilers ahead. The first stretch of finding out what happens with the Americans and Norwegians is the most enjoyable. The closest it gets to the feeling of the film. Spending decent stretches outside, hopping from one location to another, trying to piece together what happened. Using a survival horror staple, Thing makes use of notes as a way of delivering exposition. Funny thing is how short they are, especially compared to the tutorial text scrolls, or notes from other survival horror titles. Most are 1 or 2 sentences before moving to the next. There's an amusing bit later in the game hopping from one computer to another to read what's going on when one computer would have been fine. There's a nice callback to one of the funnier lines from the film about the Norwegians.
Look, man, me and Williams were tracking this weird animal through the base, and we lost him in the storm, and then we ran into a Swede.
Norwegian.
Yeah, the Norwegian guy.
Hey, Sweden! Not Swedish, Mac, the Norwegian.
There is one level where we have a long section of holding off waves of things. It goes on far too long, wearing out its welcome. When you have so many of them running around, it does take away from the survival horror element. It's more on the lines of action horror. This is fine, but does feel like the choice to dial up on action came from up on high.
Space, open wide!
Then we get to the first boss fight. These boss fights can be quite frustrating. It can be difficult to tell if you're doing any damage. More or less they turn to circle strafing and whittling them down with bullets and fire. I have to note how much of a godsend it is to have manual saving with the PC version. You have this option along with set save points. Some stretches can get very frustrating otherwise. Points where I'm ready to toss some J&B scotch into my computer. We head underground, which is how a good chunk of time is spent for the rest of the game. Under the Norwegian base, we find research facilities, looking into the thing. I'm guessing word got out from the Norwegians, and Gen Inc., a biotech company, set up base to do research. Quite the setup they have here considering it's in Antarctica. Feels a bit too much. How much time did this take? How much time did they have? I can't understand why they needed them for levels for us to go through. Still, it feels a bit forced. We have the classic sci-fi trope of evil corporations doing research into something that should be left alone or destroyed. We come across Dr. Faraday, who has done extensive research on the infection, voiced and modeled after director John Carpenter. I love the enthusiasm John Carpenter has for video games, considering how stuffy some of the film business can be around video games. He's been a huge fan since beginning with Sonic the Hedgehog in the early 90s. As of writing, there was a recent reveal of John Carpenter's Toxic Commando, set for release in 2024. Maybe I'll cover it one day. At this point, we come across Whitley, who captures us. He takes out Faraday.
I'm not doing anything until I get some goddamn answers.
You're out of your league here, Blake.
So I guess this isn't my Medal of Honor ceremony, is it?
Quite the contrary. I'm living proof that the infection can be controlled.
No, that's not possible.
The results can't be ignored, Doctor. I will be remembered as the first successful test subject.
No, not if I can help it.
I don't need your help.
The section of us escaping from this facility is great. It's much more in the vein of survival horror. We're stripped of our gear. We have to be careful in what doors we open before we rearm ourselves. There are several things on the loose. As challenging as they can be to deal with, we can't exploit their true weakness, their inability to open doors or climb ladders.
I'm pretty messed up.
Then the game adds human enemies into the mix. I mean, it was bound to happen. Combat with them is pretty conventional. They can kill you in a short amount of time if you're not careful. Their AI can be pretty bare bones at times. Although it's nice to hear them use the same sound for the alarm from the film. There are some stretches where they'll be dealing with things, so you could hang back and clear out the winner. And that second boss? Man, I thought the first boss was bad. Again, thank goodness for manual saves. The rest of the game continues to ramp up on more combat, mixing in soldiers and things and these damn turrets. You can't hit them from a distance. You have to let them open up first. Sure, this would be easy with auto aim, but without it, you have a short time frame before they fire on you. Before you know it, you're dead. We make our way to escape and deal with Whitley, the man who captured us. His little speech that I started the video with reminds me of Wesker from Resident Evil 5.
Once I take the chopper, I will begin global infection.
Ouroboros will be released into the atmosphere, ensuring complete global saturation.
He turns infected, in which we are picked up by a familiar face in a helicopter. We end the game with a turret battle against Whitley's Thing form. Who is this pilot?
Excellent timing there, pilot. Early retirement from Gen Inc.
No, not exactly. On my way back from an extended Arctic vacation.
Uh-huh. So what's your name, smartass?
McCready. R.J. McCready. U.S. Outpost 131.
And in one of the most 2002 things ever, the end credits features a song by Saliva, Simpler Times. I have so many questions about McCready here. Where did he come from? How did he escape? What happened after the end of the movie? Was he picked up and taken in for experimentation? How did he manage to keep his hat? So many questions. Something that no doubt a sequel would have gone into. Something that they were working on before the studio went under, leaving us with no sequel. And so ends The Thing, the game, an ambitious title with ideas that don't quite stick the landing. It's a fun little romp, but it could have been so much more. They honored the spirit and tone of the movie, but the execution wasn't quite there. I would love to see how they would have done things with a sequel, or if they waited a few more years for access to better tech. With what they have in mind, it sounds like it's something they could have pulled off with 7th gen tech. With the PlayStation 2 and Xbox, they weren't able to. As far as my thoughts on the movie, here's a little mini review. Covering this game gave me a good reason to rewatch the thing. It's been a few years. Great film, a simple yet intriguing premise, great characterization and acting, and fantastic practical effects. The way trust breaks down in camp is so compelling and tense, along with a great ambiguous ending, even if the game did clear it up. It's classic John Carpenter. 40 years later, it's remained a staple in sci-fi horror. What's interesting about the thing is that as of writing, there's no mention of any developers working on a game with the franchise. You think with the success of Among Us, which pulls heavy influence from the thing, the IP owners would be chomping at the bits to make a game with it. And who knows, it may be under wraps as of writing. It seems ideal for a asymmetrical multiplayer game. That said, they could also leave it as is. We've seen enough IPs dredged up for a quick buck or without an understanding of what makes it work. But the premise does have legs in regards to building a game around it, whether that be single player or multiplayer. They have proof that there is interest in this style of game. Who knows, maybe one day I'll be covering that release on this channel. But in the meantime, the game from 2002 will have to do. A fun little romp, even if it falls short of its ambitions and premise. Now excuse me while I go pour myself a J&B scotch. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Identify yourself.
Captain, it's Carter. Christ, where's everybody?
What happened here?
Something. I don't know what they were, but they attacked us. I thought they was part of the... Wait a minute. Don't you come any closer. Where the hell did you come from anyways?
A chopper brought me in. From the U.S. Research Station, 5 clicks south of here.
I'm hurt pretty bad.
Don't move, I'll see what I can do.